The Moretti estate did not welcome people like Elena Vasquez. It tolerated them. It tolerated the florists who arrived before dawn with armfuls of white roses and trailing ivy. It tolerated the caterers who moved through the kitchen like a well-drilled army, heads down, mouths shut, eyes never wandering toward the parts of the house that were not their concern. It tolerated the seamstress who had spent 3 days in the East Wing, stitching seed pearls onto a bridal veil that cost more than Elena's mother earned in a year. The estate tolerated all of them the way a river tolerates the fish inside it, without acknowledgment, without gratitude, and with the quiet understanding that the moment they were no longer useful, they would simply be gone. Elena had known this since she was 7 years old. She had been coming to the Moretti mansion for most of her life. Not as a guest. Never as a guest. She came because her mother came, and her mother came because Rosa Vasquez had worked these halls for 22 years, and in all that time, she had never once explained why she stayed. She only said it was a good job and left it at that, in the particular way she had of closing a conversation before Elena could find the door into it. Now Elena was 24, and she was back again, carrying a stack of pressed white linens through the east corridor on the second floor, while somewhere below her the rest of the world prepared itself for the wedding of Don Luca Moretti. The corridor was long and paneled in dark mahogany, the ceiling high enough to make you feel small whether you meant to or not. The carpet was burgundy and thick, absorbing every footstep until the house seemed to swallow sound as easily as it swallowed people. Portraits lined the walls on both sides, generations of Moretti men in heavy gilt frames, painted with the particular expression of people who had never in their lives been told no. Elena kept her gaze forward and her pace steady. She was almost at the linen cupboard at the far end when her foot caught the edge of the carpet runner. She stumbled. Her shoulder hit the wall first, then her palm shot out to catch herself, pressing flat against the center of the third mahogany panel from the left. The wall moved. Not violently. Not dramatically. It shifted inward perhaps 2 inches with a low, soft sigh, as though something pressurized had been gently released. Elena went completely still. The linens dropped from her arms and landed in a heap on the burgundy carpet. She stared at the wall. From the outside it looked identical to every other panel in the corridor, flush edges, no visible seam, no hinge, nothing to suggest it was anything other than solid wall. But it had moved, and where her palm had pressed, there was now a gap, thin as a knife blade, dark on the other side. She looked left. She looked right. The corridor was empty in both directions. From far below came the distant clatter of the kitchen and the bright, rapid voice of the wedding coordinator calling instructions in Italian. Elena pressed the panel again, deliberately this time, at the same point. It swung inward on a concealed hinge, smooth and perfectly silent, and cool air exhaled from the darkness on the other side. She knew she should close it. She stepped through anyway. The room beyond was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 people to stand side by side, and perhaps 4 meters long, running parallel to the corridor behind her. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling on a short cord. Elena found the switch just inside the entrance and clicked it on. The bulb threw pale yellow light across the space, and Elena stood very still and looked at what the Moretti family had been hiding behind their walls. 4 metal filing cabinets ran along the left side, institutional gray, each drawer labeled with a year in black tape. The earliest she could read said 1989. The most recent said 2021. The right-hand wall was covered floor to ceiling in photographs, dozens of them, pinned in rows with small brass tacks. Some were formal portraits. Others were candid shots taken from a distance with a long lens, a man stepping out of a car, a woman on a phone at a cafe table, a couple arguing on a doorstep, neither of them aware of the camera. Beneath each photograph, a folded sheet of paper was tucked behind the tack. Elena moved closer. She pulled one sheet free and unfolded it. A name, a date, 3 lines of typed text, and a single sentence at the bottom. Matter resolved. No further contact required. She pulled another. Testimony withdrawn. File closed. Another. A bank account number she didn't recognize, a property address in Naples, and 2 words. Leverage secured. She understood what she was looking at. This was not storage. This was not forgotten history. This was a living archive, a record of everyone the Moretti family had ever needed to silence, and exactly what they had used to do it. Her hand was already moving to the next photograph when she stopped. The face looking back at her from the wall was not a stranger's. It was her father's, Alejandro Vasquez. She knew the face from the single photograph Rosa kept in the drawer of her bedside table, the one Elena had stared at so many times as a child that she had memorized every detail. The straight nose, the wide jaw, the way his eyes looked like they were already thinking about something else. The photograph on the wall showed him getting into a car on a street Elena didn't recognize. The paper beneath it was folded. Her hands were not quite steady when she opened it. A. Vasquez. Contractor. Discovered records, East Wing, Level 2. Became liability April 2002. Matter handled. Family retained on site for continuity and compliance. She read it twice. Then a third time. Family retained on site for continuity and compliance. She had been told her father left. That he simply packed a bag one morning when she was barely 2 years old and walked out and never looked back. Rosa had said it with such flat, practiced certainty over the years that Elena had stopped asking. She had built her understanding of herself around that absence, around being a person whose father chose to leave. He had not left. She folded the paper carefully and put it in the pocket of her black trousers. Then she took her phone out and photographed the wall, every photograph, every row, and pulled open the nearest filing cabinet drawer and photographed those files too. Her hands moved quickly and without noise. Somewhere in the house a door opened and closed. She did not stop. When she stepped back out into the corridor and pressed the panel shut, it sealed behind her with the same soft sigh. She picked up the scattered linens from the carpet. She walked to the linen cupboard at the end of the corridor, placed them inside, and closed the door. Then she stood in the empty hallway with her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat and stared at the wall she had just come through. It looked like all the others. Perfectly ordinary. Perfectly sealed. Family retained on site for continuity and compliance. Her mother had known. Elena did not know how she knew this. Only that she did, with the immediate and total certainty of something that had always been true but never spoken. Rosa had known what was behind that wall. Rosa had known what happened to Alejandro Vasquez. And Rosa had stayed. For 22 years she had stayed. Elena turned and walked toward the stairs. She found her mother in the East Wing laundry room, folding a stack of pillowcases with the methodical, unhurried rhythm of a woman who had performed the same motions so many thousands of times that her hands did it without her. Elena stepped inside and closed the door. Rosa looked up. Whatever she saw in her daughter's face made her set the pillowcase down. Elena. I found the room. Elena kept her voice low and even. Behind the panel in the east corridor. Second floor. I found the filing cabinets and the photographs. I found the files. She paused. I found Papa. The color did not drain from Rosa's face. That was the thing Elena would remember later. Her mother did not look shocked. She looked like a woman who had been waiting 22 years for a particular knock on a particular door and had just heard it. Rosa sat down on the wooden stool beside the folding table. She put her hands in her lap. She was quiet for so long that the sound of the wedding preparations below, the distant voices, the movement of furniture, the arriving cars on the gravel drive, seemed to grow louder. How much did you read? Rosa asked. Enough. His files said he found something in this house, that he became a liability in April 2002, and the matter was handled. Elena's jaw tightened. I was 2 years old, Mama. You told me he left. You told me that my whole life. Rosa's eyes closed briefly. When they opened, they were wet. Sit down, she said quietly. Please. Elena sat on an overturned crate across from her. The laundry room smelled of detergent and warm linen, the same smell it had always had, and it seemed obscene that the room should smell this ordinary while the world was rearranging itself around her. Rosa folded her hands together. Then she began. She had been working at the estate for 3 months when Alejandro found work there as a maintenance contractor, the spring of 2001. They were young, newly married, Rosa already pregnant with Elena. It was good money, regular work, a household that required constant upkeep, and always had something that needed fixing. They were careful and professional and kept their heads down, the way you learn to do around people with this kind of money. Then in March of 2002, Alejandro had been sent to repair a water pipe in the East Wing. He had gone through the wrong panel by accident, the same way Elena had, and found himself inside the room with the filing cabinets and the photographs. He had not been as quick as Elena to understand what he was looking at. He had pulled a folder and read it properly, and what he read had been enough. He told Rosa that night. He said he was going to the police. He said there were records in that room of murders, not disappearances, not vague references to things handled murders, with enough specificity to put Luca Moretti's father away and half his network with him. He had planned to photograph the files the following morning and take them to a detective he trusted. He never got the chance. The following morning, 2 men from the estate's security team came to their staff room before 6 o'clock. They told Alejandro that Don Moretti Sr. wanted to speak with him privately.
He went with them.
He did not come back. Rosa had gone to Don Moretti Sr. herself that afternoon, with Elena strapped to her chest and her heart in her mouth, and told him she would go to the police herself if she was not given an explanation. Don Moretti Sr. had been a calm man, soft-spoken. He had offered her a seat and a cup of coffee and explained the situation with the measured patience of someone explaining a business arrangement to a new employee. Alejandro had been removed. He would not be coming back. If Rosa spoke to the police, Elena would grow up without a mother as well. If Rosa stayed, if she worked and said nothing and raised her daughter quietly, Elena would be safe, would want for nothing within reason, and would never be touched. He had held Rosa's gaze while he said it, across a desk polished to a mirror shine, and Rosa had known without question that every word was true. She had stayed. "I told you he left because that was survivable," Rosa said. Her voice was so steady that it was worse than if she had wept. "I told you he left because growing up angry at an absent father is something a person recovers from. Growing up knowing what I knew, knowing what they did, I couldn't give you that. I couldn't put that inside you while we were still inside their walls." Elena sat very still. "You were never going to leave," she said. Not an accusation. A realization. "I couldn't. Not until they said so. Not without risking you." Rosa looked at her daughter with an expression so layered, grief, shame, exhaustion, love, that Elena had to look away. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for every day of it." The laundry room was quiet for a long time. Then Elena reached into her pocket and took out her phone and showed Rosa the photographs she had taken. Rosa looked at them without touching the phone. When she reached the image of Alejandro's file, she turned her face away. "The wedding is in 2 days," Elena said. Rosa said nothing. "Don Luca Moretti is not his father, but he runs everything his father built. He authorized what's in those cabinets. He knows exactly what happened to Papa." Elena put the phone back in her pocket. "And in 2 days he's going to stand at an altar in front of 300 people and marry a woman who has no idea who she is marrying." Rosa turned back to her. Her face was very still. "Elena, if you do what I think you're about to say you want to do, he has to be stopped. You will not survive it. Isabel Fontaine deserves to know." Rosa was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, so quietly Elena almost missed it, "Be careful. Please. Be more careful than your father was." Elena stood. She smoothed the front of her black trousers, straightened the collar of her white staff blouse, and looked at her mother. "I will," she said. "But I'm not going to be silent." You're watching Stories by Niksy. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a chapter drop. Getting to Isabel Fontaine was almost impossible. Elena had spent the remainder of the day watching from the edges of rooms, moving through the estate in the way she had been trained by a lifetime of invisibility, efficiently, quietly, without drawing the eye. She had mapped the patterns. The wedding coordinator circulated between the ballroom, the bridal suite, and the catering tent in a rigid rotation. Security, 4 men in dark suits who communicated in low murmurs through earpieces, maintained a loose perimeter around the main areas of the ground floor. And Isabel herself was rarely alone. A rotating stream of bridesmaids, stylists, her own mother, and the wedding coordinator ensured she moved through the house in a permanent, insulating cloud of femininity and expensive perfume. Elena needed 5 minutes. She could not find 5 minutes. What she found instead, on the afternoon of the day before the wedding, was something she had not expected. She had positioned herself in the corridor outside the bridal suite on the pretense of replacing the flowers in the wall vases, a task she had quietly volunteered for after overhearing one of the florists complain about the third-floor stairs. She was halfway through the arrangement nearest the suite door when the door opened and one of the bridesmaids stepped out with an empty champagne glass, leaving the door slightly ajar behind her. Through the gap, Elena could see Isabel standing at the window with her back to the room. She was on her phone. Her voice was low, but in the quiet of the corridor Elena could hear her clearly. "I know what I'm doing," Isabel said. Not warmly, with the controlled edge of someone repeating a position they have already defended many times. "I need you to trust me. Everything is in place." A pause. Then, "Marco," I said, "it's handled." Elena's hands went still among the flowers. "Marco." Isabel was speaking to Marco Moretti, Luca's brother, the night before her wedding to Luca, in a voice that was not the voice of a woman making friendly conversation with a future brother-in-law. It was the voice of two people coordinating something. It was the voice of a plan. The bridesmaid returned, and Elena moved further down the corridor, her mind turning rapidly. Whatever she had assumed about Isabelle Fontaine, innocent, deceived, in need of rescue, she was no longer certain. The woman at the window did not sound like a victim. She sounded like a player. But a player on whose side? Elena did not have time to find out. What she had was a recording on her phone, and a wedding in less than 24 hours. Whatever Isabel was or was not doing with Marco, Elena's job was the same. She needed to make sure that when the moment came, she had everything she needed to end this. She descended to the ground floor as the household began to gather for the rehearsal dinner. The estate's formal dining room had been transformed, 60 guests arranged at long tables beneath chandeliers strung with white roses, the room warm and candlelit and thick with the smell of expensive food and more expensive wine. Elena moved along the outer edge of the room with a tray, part of the catering staff, invisible. She was refilling water glasses near the middle of the table when she felt it, a shift in the quality of the air, the particular weight of being watched. She looked up. Don Luca Moretti was seated at the head of the table, Isabel at his right. He was in conversation with a man on his left, laughing, at ease, the very picture of a man in the full confidence of his own world. But his eyes, as Elena raised hers, had already found her face, as though they had been on her for some time without her knowing. He did not stop laughing. He did not change expression. He simply looked at her, dark gray eyes, slow and deliberate, with the look of a man who missed nothing and forgot no one. It lasted 2 seconds. Then he returned to his conversation. Elena set the water jug down on the tray and walked back toward the kitchen without rushing. She understood what that look meant. He had noticed her. He was watching her. He did not yet know what she had found, but he had registered her as a variable, and in a house like this, being noticed by Luca Moretti was the beginning of becoming a problem. She had to move faster. That night, when the rehearsal dinner wound down and the guests dispersed to their rooms, Elena waited. She waited until the household was quiet, until the security rotation had settled into its overnight pattern. Then she climbed to the second floor and went back to the hidden room. She spent 40 minutes inside. She read files she had not had time for during the day. She photographed everything she had missed. She found, in the bottom drawer of the last filing cabinet, under the year 2002, a folder labeled with her father's name, and inside it a small handheld voice recorder sealed in a clear plastic sleeve. Old technology. A cassette recorder, the kind that had been common in offices in the early 2000s. The kind that recorded continuously when the record button was pressed. She held it in both hands for a moment. Then she put it in her pocket and left the room. She did not know yet whether it worked. But she knew whose voice, if God was paying any attention at all, she was going to find on it. The estate locked down at midnight. It was not dramatic, no gates slamming, no announcements. The security rotation simply tightened, the perimeter contracted, and the guards who had been moving through the house all day took up fixed positions. Elena noticed it from the window of the small staff room on the ground floor where she and Rosa had been given cots. She lay on hers fully dressed and listened to the house settle into its new, tighter configuration. Rosa was asleep, or pretending to be. Her breathing was slow and even, her face turned toward the wall. Elena turned the old cassette recorder over in her hands in the dark. She had found, in the back of a kitchen drawer, a pair of AA batteries and an adapter that fit the recorder's bottom port. She had pressed play in the bathroom with the tap running to cover the sound, and she had listened for 11 minutes with the recorder held close to her ear. The tape was degraded in places, hiss and static swallowing whole seconds, but enough was there. Enough was unmistakably, perfectly there. A voice she now recognized as Don Moretti Sr. A second voice she did not know. And a third, younger, measured, giving instructions with the ease of someone for whom giving instructions was as natural as breathing. Make sure there is nothing left that connects him to this house. The wife stays, she is leverage we may need. The child stays with her. They are insurance. But Alejandro Vasquez is no longer a concern I want to revisit. She had replayed it 4 times to be certain. The voice was Luca's. He had been 22 years old when it was recorded. Already running operations for his father. Already making decisions about who was and was not a concern. Elena turned off the bathroom tap and went back to her cot. She was lying there, recorder in her pocket, running through the morning in her mind, when the knock came. Quiet 3 beats, the kind of knock designed not to wake anyone else. She went to the door. Marco Moretti stood in the corridor, still in his navy jacket from the dinner. He looked younger without the formal context around him, dark eyes restless, stubble heavier than it had been earlier. "Walk with me," he said. It was not quite a request. They went out through the kitchen door into the estate gardens, wide, manicured, silver in the moonlight. The security rotation did not cover this side until 1 in the morning. She did not ask how he knew that. "You found the room," Marco said. Not a question. "Yes." "And you found something in it?" "Yes." He stopped walking and turned to face her. In the low light, the family resemblance to Luca was muted. He had softer angles, an unease that his brother never showed. "I'm not going to tell you the room doesn't exist or that what's inside it doesn't mean what you think it means. I'm done pretending." He pushed a hand through his hair. "I grew up in that house, Elena. I know exactly what that room is." "Then you know what happened to my father." A pause. "Yes." The single word landed flatly in the night air between them. "Then you understand why I'm not leaving," Elena said. "I understand why you think you can't." Marco's voice was quiet and tight. "But I need you to hear me. What you're holding, whatever you found, if you use it the wrong way, people will die. Not just Luca. People who are in those files. People who have spent years trying to get out from under this family quietly. If you stand up in that cathedral tomorrow and blow the roof off without a structure in place to catch what falls, it will be chaos. And chaos serves Luca, not you." Elena studied him. "What structure?" "I've been building one for 2 years. Quietly. With people who have more reach than I do. People who can make sure that when the files go public, they go to the right investigators, in the right sequence, with the right protections in place for the people inside them." He held her gaze. "I need 1 more day. Get through the wedding tomorrow. Let me handle Luca. By tomorrow night, you and Rosa are free of this house and this family permanently, and Luca faces something that will actually stick instead of getting buried by his lawyers." Elena was quiet for a long time. The garden was still. Somewhere on the far side of the estate, a door opened and closed. "You spoke to Isabel tonight," Elena said. Something moved across Marco's face. Not quite surprised, but close to it. "Yes. She knows. She has known for 3 months. She came to me." He said it carefully, as though testing each word before placing it. "She is not a victim in this, Elena. She chose to stay in position because walking away early would have tipped Luca off. She has been helping me." Elena processed this. Isabel at the window. "I know what I'm doing." "Marco," I said, "it's handled." "If I wait," Elena said slowly, "and something goes wrong, if your 2 years of quiet preparation disappears the same way my father did." "I know," Marco said. I know what I'm asking you to trust. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she shook her head. I can't, she said simply. I've been waiting my whole life without knowing I was waiting. I'm not waiting one more day. Marco closed his eyes briefly. Then opened them. Then be careful. Whatever you do, be careful. He went back inside. Elena stood in the garden alone for a few minutes, then followed. When she reached the staff room, the door was open. She stepped inside and turned on the light. Rosa's cot was empty, not slept in and risen, undisturbed, except for the blanket turned back at one corner, as though someone had lifted Rosa from it. On the pillow, placed with deliberate precision, lay a single white rose. Elena stared at it. The Moretti family's answer to her refusal, delivered within the hour, which meant someone in this house had been watching her conversation with Marco in the garden, which meant Luca had not been waiting to find out what she knew. He had already known. He had known since the rehearsal dinner, when he found her face across the room and held it with those deliberate gray eyes. He had given her the night to make the right decision. She had not made it, and so now he held Rosa instead. Elena sat down on the edge of her cot. She did not allow herself to panic. She let the fear move through her like cold water, and then she set it aside and thought. Rosa was still alive. If they wanted her dead, there would have been no rose, there would have been no signal at all, because a signal was an invitation to negotiate. The rose was a message, we have her. Behave tomorrow, and you get her back. Elena reached into her pocket and closed her hand around the cassette recorder. She thought about her father getting into the car. She thought about Rosa folding pillowcases for 22 years with the look of a woman serving a sentence. She thought about Luca Moretti at the head of the table, laughing, at ease in the full assurance of his own untouchability. She lay back on the cot. She did not sleep. But she made, in the dark and the quiet, the decision she had probably been moving toward since her palm pressed that panel and the wall breathed open. By the time the estate woke for the wedding, she knew exactly what she was going to do. Don't stop here. Share this story and tag someone who lives for this kind of drama. This is Stories by Niksy, where every chapter hits different. The Cathedral of San Benedetto had stood for 400 years on the edge of the old town, and in that time it had witnessed things that the stone walls had absorbed and never given back. Elena sat in the very last pew on the left side, close enough to the great doors that she could feel the morning air from outside, and she thought that the cathedral was about to absorb something else today. She had arrived before the guests. She had dressed in the one item of clothing she had brought that was not her staff uniform, a plain black jacket, over her white blouse and dark trousers. She had the cassette recorder in her inner pocket and her phone in her hand, and she had spent the hour before the guests arrived sitting very still and watching the space fill. The Moretti wedding brought 300 people. They came in dark cars and emerged in the kind of clothes that required planning months in advance. They filled the cathedral pew by pew, a congregation of wealth and alliance and obligation dressed as celebration. Elena watched them arrive and thought about the filing cabinets, about how many of these faces were pinned on that wall, how many of them had been resolved and retained and handled. How many of them were here today not out of affection for Luca Moretti, but out of something much older and much less comfortable than affection. The organ began. The congregation rose. Isabel Fontaine came down the aisle on her father's arm, and Elena, who had expected to feel only urgency when she saw her, felt something more complicated. The gown was immaculate, cathedral length, the same veil she had watched a seamstress stitch for 3 days. Isabel's auburn hair was pinned perfectly. Her face was composed with extraordinary skill, warm, radiant, the face of a woman in love. Elena knew now that it was performance. That did not make it less remarkable. Whatever Isabel had agreed to do with Marco, she had held it together for months. Walking into this cathedral today, wearing a composure Elena was not sure she could have matched. At the altar, Luca Moretti stood in a charcoal suit, white shirt, the same dark gray eyes that had found Elena across the rehearsal dinner table the night before. He watched Isabel approach with an expression of such polished warmth that Elena almost understood, for just a moment, how people believed in him so completely. Then the warmth moved across his face in a particular way, too controlled, too rehearsed, and she remembered the voice on the tape. Alejandro Vasquez is no longer a concern I want to revisit. Father Donatello presided at the altar in his black cassock and clerical collar, 70 years old, white-haired, diminished-looking in person in a way he never seemed in the photographs she had seen of him. His voice was deep and sonorous, and filled the cathedral with the unhurried authority of a man who had performed this role for this family many times. Elena watched him and thought, he has stood in this spot for every Moretti wedding, every baptism, every funeral. He has spoken the words over their dead and blessed the children who would become what Luca became, and he has known. For decades he has known. The ceremony proceeded. The readings. The responses. The exchange of rings. Isabel's hands steady, her eyes bright, her performance immaculate to the very end. Then Father Donatello raised his voice. If anyone present knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, he paused in the traditional way. Let them speak now, or forever hold their peace. The silence that followed was cathedral deep and total. Elena stood up. The sound of 300 people turning was not loud. It was just breath and the soft shift of fabric and the creak of pews. 300 faces found her, in her black jacket and white blouse, standing alone in the very last pew like someone who had been placed there by accident. At the altar, Luca Moretti looked at her. His face did not change. Not one line, not one muscle. He simply looked at her with those dark gray eyes across the full length of the cathedral, and in the stillness his stillness was the most frightening thing in the room. My name is Elena Vasquez, she said. Her voice carried without effort in the cathedral acoustics, clear and steady in a way that surprised even her. My mother, Rosa Vasquez, has worked in the Moretti household for 22 years. My father, Alejandro Vasquez, was a maintenance contractor at the Moretti estate in 2002. He found evidence of serious crimes against this family's associates, and he was killed for it. She reached into her inner jacket pocket. I found a recording inside this house. I would like you all to hear it before this wedding continues. She held up the cassette recorder and pressed play. The cathedral's acoustics, built to carry centuries of prayer, carried the recording to every corner of the space. The sound quality was degraded, hiss and static at the edges, but the voices were unmistakable to anyone listening for them. Don Moretti Sr., calm and methodical, an unidentified second man. And then Luca, 22 years old, already running operations, giving the order in the measured tone of someone for whom this was simply administration. Make sure there is nothing left that connects him to this house. The wife stays, she is leverage we may need. The child stays with her. They are insurance. But Alejandro Vasquez is no longer a concern I want to revisit. 11 seconds of static. Then the tape ran out. The silence that followed was of a completely different quality to the silence before. Then the cathedral came apart. Not violently. The way a structure fails when you remove the right load-bearing wall, not all at once, but in progressive, inevitable stages. Voices rising in overlapping waves, first whispers, then something louder. In the third pew from the front, a man in a dark suit stood abruptly and said something to the person beside him in rapid, low Italian. Near the transept, a woman had her hand pressed over her mouth. Two men near the central aisle were already moving toward the side exits. Caruso, the estate's head of security, whom Elena recognized from years of watching him move through the mansion, had begun walking down the left aisle toward her with the controlled speed of someone who had handled situations like this before. He was perhaps 8 pews away. Then Isabel Fontaine removed her hands from Luca's. She did it quietly. Simply uncupilled her fingers from his and stepped back. 1 step, then 2, until she was no longer beside him but standing alone in the open space before the altar. She looked at her family in the front pew. Her mother. Her father. She held their gaze for a moment, and whatever passed between them was not a question. She had already answered it. Then Isabel turned and began to walk back down the aisle. Steadily. Without hurrying. The cathedral gown trailing behind her, the long veil catching the candlelight as she moved through 300 people who had gone completely, collectively still. Caruso stopped. He looked from Isabel to the altar to Elena, and the calculation on his face resolved into the understanding that there was no version of this situation that his training had prepared him for. Isabel walked the full length of the aisle. When she drew level with Elena's pew, she did not stop. She did not look at Elena, but as she passed, she said, very quietly for Elena alone, 2 words. "Thank you." Then she walked through the great cathedral doors and out into the morning light, and was gone. At the altar, Luca Moretti had not moved. He was still standing exactly where his bride had left him, in his charcoal suit, in the candlelight, in front of 300 people, and his face was finally doing something real. The warmth was gone. The cold calculation was gone. What was underneath both of them was something Elena had not expected to see there. Not rage, not threat, but exposure. The look of a man who has built every room in his life out of other people's silence, and felt the walls come down at once. He looked at Elena. She held his gaze across the full length of the cathedral and did not look away. Father Donatello had stopped speaking. He stood at the altar with his hands at his sides and his face the color of old wax. He had been there. The hidden room had been adjacent to the priest's visiting quarters for 22 years. 22 years of files, of names, of resolved matters. He had baptized Moretti children and buried Moretti enemies and stood at this altar every time the family needed God's endorsement on something that deserved the opposite. He was the last one standing at the altar when the cathedral finally, fully erupted. The formal collapse of the Moretti network took months. Federal investigators arrived at the estate within 48 hours of the wedding. Marco Moretti, who had spent 2 years doing exactly what he told Elena he was doing, gave testimony that opened cases across 3 countries. The files from the hidden room, every cabinet, every drawer, every photograph, were entered as evidence in proceedings that reached further than Elena had imagined possible on the night she first pressed that panel in the East Corridor. Father Donatello resigned from his parish the morning after the wedding. He did not speak publicly.
He did not need to.
Isabelle Fontaine gave a single interview 6 months later, in which she said only that she had done what she believed was necessary and that she wished Elena Vasquez well. Elena watched the interview on her phone in a small apartment she and Rosa had rented on the other side of the city and thought that Isabelle Fontaine was, whatever else she was, a woman who knew precisely how to hold a position. But all of that came later. On the morning of the wedding, Elena walked out of the cathedral doors into October sunlight and took out her phone. She typed a message to the number Marco had given her at the end of their garden conversation, when he had pressed a folded paper into her hand and said, with the resigned certainty of a man who knew he had not been persuasive enough, "In case it goes the other way, use this." The message said, "It's done. Where is she?" The reply came in under a minute. An address 2 streets away. Elena found Rosa in a small cafe, seated at a corner table, hands wrapped around a coffee cup that had gone cold, dressed in her gray maid's uniform because they had taken her before she could change. She looked up when Elena pushed through the door, and for a moment she simply read her daughter's face in the way that mothers do, finding every answer she needed in an expression before a single word was spoken. Then Rosa stood and opened her arms. Elena crossed the cafe and walked into them and stayed there, in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday morning in an ordinary cafe, while outside the city continued its ordinary life, and somewhere across town the world that had held them both down for 22 years was slowly, irrevocably beginning to come undone. The walls of the Moretti estate still stood, but everything they had hidden was out in the light now. And it had started with a maid's daughter, who pressed her palm against a wall that was never supposed to move. The end. Stories by Niksy. Subscribe.
Share.
Stay obsessed. New stories every week. Because real courage doesn't always wear a crown. Sometimes it wears a staff uniform.